To begin tonight's discussion, there is a truth that you must first understand. Each one of us, being made in the image of God, has a divinely created identity. When you frame our identity as imago Dei, being made in the image of God, you're stepping into one of the most profound concepts in the entire history of human thought. Accepting that aspect of your identity isn't just a belief. It's a reorientation, a transformational restoration of how you see God, yourself, others, and the world. Tonight, we will explore what accepting your identity actually looks like in lived experience. It begins with recognizes that being made in the image of God is about essence, not achievement, not performance. Being made in God's image isn't something you earn, it's something you are, before you do anything right or wrong. Accepting that truth means shifting from I must prove my worth to my worth is inherent. That is a radical move, especially in a world that measures people by performance, productivity, status, or perfection. Do you see dignity as non-negotiable? If you're made in the image of God, then your dignity isn't fragile. It can be wounded, ignored, or even forgotten, but not erased. Acceptance of our identity often begins with letting this truth challenge our internal narratives that tell us, I'm not enough, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable. Those narratives don't stand up to the concept of an image bearer of God. We must understand that identity affects purpose. Being made in God's image traditionally implies creativity, moral agency, relational capacity, the ability to love, the ability to steward or care for creation. Accepting your identity means asking, how do I reflect God in the way I create? How do I reflect God in the way that I treat others? How do I reflect God in the way I use my freedom? Our identity becomes a compass that leads to fulfilling our purpose. Accepting our identity is transformative. Allow it to transform how you see others. If you bear God's image, so does everyone else. This is often missed. Acceptance becomes real when it changes how you speak to people, accept people, forgive people, and advocate for people. It's impossible to fully accept your own divine identity while denying someone else's. One of the more difficult aspects of accepting your identity is embracing that tension between divine image and human imperfection. Being made in God's image does not mean being flawless. It means you carry a spark of something divine within a very human frame. Acceptance often requires understanding both truths. I am capable of reflecting something divine, and I'm also capable of falling short. That tension is not a flaw, it's the human condition. Accepting your true identity is a process. Live into it gradually. Identity isn't accepted in a single moment of insight. It's lived into through patience, training, relationship, community, reflection, and courage. You grow and mature into the identity that is already within you. Accepting a divinely created identity can mean different things depending upon someone's spiritual upbringing. But there are a few themes that appear to be common. Start by noticing what is already true. Most spiritual frameworks suggest that identity is not something you achieve, but it's something revealed. People often look outward at accomplishments, roles, titles, and approval, when the true identity is inward, quiet, and persistent. A useful starting point is asking, what qualities feel most natural to me? What values feel like they come from somewhere deeper than preference? These are often the fingerprints of a deeper identity. Let go of the identities you were handed to by others. Family expectations, cultural norms, and social pressure can bury a person's sense of who they are. Accepting a divinely created identity often requires unlearning, such as I should be, people like me are supposed to, if I don't do X, I'm failing. Remember that letting go is not passive or weak. It is an act of courage. Listen for the quiet voice rather than the loud one. Many spiritual traditions describe the divine voice as subtle, as intuition, conscience, a sense of calling, a feeling of alignment or peace. It rarely shouts. It nudges. People often expect revelation to be dramatic, but acceptance usually comes from paying attention to the small, consistent signals. Accepting your divinely created identity means accepting responsibility. A divinely created identity isn't just comforting, it's being accountable. It asks, how will you live in alignment with what you've been given? What graces are you meant to manifest? What kind of person are you called to become? With identity comes responsibility. You manifest your identity when you are living as if it's already true. Identity becomes real through action. If someone believes they are meant to be compassionate, courageous, creative, or wise, they grow into that identity by practicing it. Spiritual identity is less like a label and more like a path paved by your essence and being. Understand that acceptance is a process. It is not a moment. Most people don't wake up one day and say, yes, I fully accept who I am. It's gradual, and it spirals rather than moving in a straight line. Is identity the worth, the purpose, the responsibility, or is it something else entirely? When you put them together, they form a three-dimensional concept of what it means to be human in a theological sense. Within your identity, worth is not earned. Since you are made in the image of God, then your worth is not conditional, it's not comparative, it's not fragile, and it's not irrevocable. It's ontological. It is built into your very essence. This is a direct challenge to almost every modern metric of value, of productivity, of attractiveness, of intelligence, morality, and success. None of those can add to or subtract from divine image bearing. Accepting your true identity is difficult because most people were trained by family, by culture, or by their own inner critic to believe worth must be proven. Accepting divine worth often feels like unlearning shame, dismantling perfectionism, confronting the internalized voices that say you're not enough. It's not arrogance, it's humility. You're agreeing with something bigger than your self-doubt. What true acceptance of your identity looks like in practice is that you stop treating yourself as a problem to fix. You stop negotiating for dignity. You begin to speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone who is holy and beloved. Now, many question the purpose of knowing your true identity. Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11, specifically shows the import of knowing your true identity. Satan directly challenged Jesus' identity and his relationship with God. He continues to challenge us in the same manner. Identity calls you forward. If worth is about being, purpose is about becoming in presence. Being made in God's image traditionally implies capacities that mirror divine qualities such as creativity, moral agency, relational depth, compassion, stewardship, and the ability to bring order out of chaos. Purpose isn't usually a single task. It's the manifestation of these divine capacities in your unique context and sphere of influence. Purpose is often confusing since people expect purpose to be like a sudden lightning bolt, a clear job title, a dramatic calling. But most often, true purpose is discovered through revelation, through attention, obedience, experimentation, community, and through courage. It's less like a map and more like a path that you walk. God will ask you to be, then He enables and empowers you to walk it out. One can see what acceptance looks like in practice. You receive clarity before acting because you waited upon Daddy. You start aligning your choices with the qualities that reflect God. You treat your manifested graces as entrusted through you, not taken as yours. Walking in your identity requires something of you. This is where people often resist because it's costly. If you bear God's image, then your life is not morally neutral. You are responsible for how you treat others, how you use your freedom, how you steward your influence, how you cultivate or neglect your relationships, how you respond to injustice, and how you reflect God's essence in your relationships. Responsibility is not punishment. It's honor. It means your life has weight and value. People shirk responsibility because it feels heavy and holds them accountable. Responsibility implies that you can't hide behind cynicism, you can't pretend that your actions don't matter, and that you can't dehumanize others without contradicting your own identity. Responsibility is the bridge between identity and action. Acceptance of your full and true divinely created identity is manifested in practice. You begin to see your choices as sacred. You treat others as image bearers, even when it's inconvenient. You allow your identity to shape your ethics, not the other way around. When you integrate worth, purpose, and responsibility, something powerful happens. Worth tells you who you are. Purpose tells you what you're for. and responsibility tells you how to live it out. Most people accept one or two of these, but rarely all three. Accepting all three is what transforms identity from a doctrine into a lived reality. A good question to address at this point would be, when walking in my identity, understanding worth, purpose, and responsibility, how is being made in the image of God manifested? This question shifts identity from a concept to embodiment. If worth, purpose, and responsibility are the three legs of the stool, then being made in the image of God is what sits on top of them and becomes visible in a person's life. When manifested through worth, you carry yourself as someone who is set apart. When you accept your inherent worth as an image bearer, it shows up in subtle but unmistakable ways. You stop treating yourself as disposable. You rest, you heal, you set boundaries, and you refuse to self-degrade. You speak to yourself with dignity, not flattery, but dignity. You refuse to narrate your life with contempt. You walk with quiet confidence, not arrogance, but the steadiness of someone who knows they were divinely created intentionally. They were wanted. You stop comparing yourselves to others because divine worth is not a competition. People sense a groundedness in you. A person who knows their worth doesn't need to dominate or shrink. They simply are. This is the image of God manifesting as presence. When manifested through purpose, you reflect God's essence in what you do. Purpose is where the divine image becomes creative and active. It manifests because you create, not necessarily art, but order, beauty, solutions, healing, and community. You pursue what is good, true, and just, even when it costs you something. You manifest your graces as they are entrusted, because in the Imago Dei framework, they are. You bring life into places that feel barren. You manifest encouragement, wisdom, clarity, compassion. All of these are divine echoes. Your life begins to have a signature, a recognizable pattern of goodness that feels larger than your personality. This is the image of God manifesting as fruitfulness. When manifested through responsibility, you treat others as fellow image bearers. This is where Imago Dei becomes ethical and relational. You refuse to dehumanize anyone, even those you disagree with or even dislike. You take your choices seriously because they affect others. You practice forgiveness and mercy, not because it's easy, but because it reflects the one whose image you bear. You steward your influence with humility. You recognize that power, any power, is sacred responsibility. People feel safe around you. They feel seen. They feel honored. This is the image of God manifesting as love and justice. When worth, purpose, and responsibility align, the image of God, the divinely created identity, becomes visible in a person, the way a flame becomes visible in a lantern. The manifestation is like a life that radiates dignity, a presence that brings order, beauty, and goodness, a way of relating that honors the sacredness in others, a moral seriousness that does not crush joy, a humility that does not erase strength, a courage that doesn't require applause. It's not perfection, it's reflection, not imitation. It's participation, not striving. It's unveiling a revelation. When you take worth, purpose, and responsibility seriously as expressions of being made in the image of God, then relationships and community become the primary places where that identity is revealed. The Imago Dei is never just an internal truth. It's something that becomes visible in how you relate to others. You relate from wholeness, not from neediness. When you accept your inherent worth as an image bearer of God, you stop entering relationships to get identity, and you start entering them to share identity. You don't cling to people to feel valuable. You bring value with you. You don't tolerate dehumanizing treatment because you know your dignity is not negotiable. You can give love without fear of depletion. Worth becomes a well, not a bucket. You can receive love without suspicion because you no longer believe that you're unworthy of it. A person who knows their worth becomes a stabilizing presence within a community. They don't drain others. They don't dominate others. They make space for others to feel safe and seen. This is the image of God manifesting as relational integrity. You become a life giver, not a life taker. Purpose isn't just about vocation. It's about how you show up in the lives of others. You manifest graces to build others up. Encouragement, wisdom, creativity, leadership. Whatever you manifest becomes a blessing. You bring order where there's chaos. Not control, but clarity, peace, and steadiness. You help others discover their own purpose because image bearers call forth the image in others. You create environments where people flourish. In homes, friendships, teams, and communities, your presence cultivates growth. People begin to associate you with restoration. You become someone whose presence makes others more themselves, not less. This is the image of God manifesting as creative influence. Responsibility is where Imago Dei becomes ethical and communal. You treat others as sacred. You refuse to reduce people to labels, to roles, or their usefulness. You see the divine imprint even in those who frustrate you. You practice forgiveness and reconciliation, not because it's easy, but because image bearers repair what is broken. You speak truth without cruelty and offer grace without enabling, a balance that mirrors divine character. You protect the vulnerable because sacredness demands advocacy. You become someone others trust with their dignity. People feel honored, not used. They feel valued, not tolerated. This is the image of God manifesting as justice and mercy. When worth, purpose, and responsibility converge, relationships stop being transactional and become transformational. The community around you begins to experience belonging because you treat people as inherently valuable. They grow because your purpose inspires and strengthens others. They feel safe because your acceptance of responsibility protects and honors their dignity. They experience unity because you refuse to dehumanize even in conflict. They receive healing because your presence carries reconciliation rather than division. In other words, the Imago Dei becomes visible not in isolation, but in connection. You become a living reminder that every person is sacred, every relationship is meaningful, and every community is a place where God can be reflected. These are the blessings that others receive when you understand, when you accept, and when you walk in your divinely created identity.